The Ingham Infirmary, South Shields, was built as an extension of the South Shields and Westow Dispensary by public subscription in 1873 to commemorate Robert Ingham, Esquire, on his retirement as an MP. Its purpose was to care for the sick and lame poor residing in South Shields. It was opened with 21 beds, but was enlarged in 1899, when the Redhead Wing was opened with an additional 48 beds. In 1905, a new operating theatre was added and a nurses' home was built. In 1935, 2 new wards were opened, together with more adequate casualty, physiotherapy and X-ray departments. The Ingham Infirmary was pulled down in 1991 to make way for housing.
I was 16. I started as a cadet nurse. There was very much a hierarchy in those days. We were put in all different departments. I was on a male surgical ward, outpatients, physiotherapy. And then as you got to 18, you had to sit an exam. And if you passed, you got to be a student.
I waited until I was 16 and you could start at the hospital then as a cadet. I just went up to the hospital actually and asked if I could speak to somebody about it, because it was much more formal then. It was lovely being a cadet. I think it was a great introduction to nursing, because you were sort of working with experienced people, with patients and in departments, so you got a really good knowledge of all the things that were going on in hospital, but you were sort of learning on the job, I suppose. And then I just went on to do training straight from there. So I did, it was SRN then, not RGN. So that was for 3 years. I suppose it would seem very old-fashioned now. It was ward-based, but you did time in the classroom, so not like a degree. As a student nurse, it was like a striped uniform with quite a stiff collar. The collars were over and always wore a cap. By that time it was a sort of the flat cap, not the big, the fancy ones. So I always had to wear that. And aprons, an elasticated waisted belt over your apron.
The collars were terrible because they cut your neck, so we used to rub them with soap. You had to wear your uniform at all times. We had a navy blue gabardine if we went outside with a hat. When I started, there was no disposables at all. Everything was metal, kidney-shaped, and in the treatment room there was a steriliser. It was like a big box, and it was my duty to put everything in, turn it on so that it came to the boil, so that it was boiled when the nurses came to lay their trolleys. You were told which patients were going home or which patients were going to theatre, and then you went round and you stripped beds. And then in an afternoon we had to sit in the linen cupboard and we had to pack the steel drums and make up dressings. So there was green towels and you had to make up like what they called a pre-op, because they used to paint people colours that the surgeons liked before they operated.
As a cadet, I did work in, it was called CSSD, so it was where everything was sterilised. So if there was a procedure went on the ward, you would put everything back in the tray, all of the steel instruments, and they would go into the bucket for CSSD and would come and collect every day. And so they were sterilised. The doctors then, you had a lot more respect. You could never call a consultant by their first name. And they ruled like an iron fist, when they did ward rounds and things like that. The ward had to be immaculate and, everybody had to be quiet, and it was very methodical. Because we had Nightingale wards then where, they had usually a big ward and a small ward and a couple of side rooms.
When the consultants did a round, the ward was shut, so everybody had to leave. The doors were shut and the sister went with the doctors round. As a cadet, my job at the end of the round was to lay a tray with bone china, cups and saucers and plates with biscuits on and coffee and an ashtray, because everybody smoked. The uniforms were different, so everybody knew who the sister was and who the assistant matron was and the deputy matron. Everybody knew.
And at that time we had to live in the nurse's home. To become a nurse, you had to live in the nurse's home. You were very well looked after, very well cared for.
It was very strict. We had to live in for 2.5 years in the nurse's home. We had a room, but there was a large area where there was bathroom and toilets. So, we just had a bedroom and a bed. We had a home sister. There was a dining room in the nurse's home. A matron's table was at the top, and the tables went round in rank. So if you were cadet nurse, you got your meal last, which was then matron had probably on their suite. If you were late getting off the ward, you had to go to the top table and apologise to matron for being late.
Oh, she's very well known. I mean, she was very strict, very kind, very caring, very compassionate, fantastic, because I suppose she didn't suffer fools gladly either. But I do think she was like quite remarkable in what she did, and you could tell there was no divide between who came, you know, the poorest people, where everybody was treated exactly the same. And I think she was just fantastic at her job. She was quite, I don't know, I suppose instrumental in a lot of people who followed her. She was very formidable. Maybe patients didn't realise how good she was for them. I think she genuinely cared about people. And it's strange, isn't it? Because when you've got somebody who's like quite bombastic and, you know, scary, they can have that tender side, you know, to them as well. But she was very well known.
The Clevedon Park Sanatorium, South Shields, was formerly the mansion house and surrounding land which made up part of the Clevedon Park estate. It was adapted as additional accommodation for cases of tuberculosis and opened with 36 beds in 1921. In 1967, it became Clevedon Park Hospital before closing in 1979. The hospital was demolished in 1981. Modern housing stands on the site of the old house.
That's the claim of all people who are from Jarrow Ward, born in a field.
Yeah. It's now a home for people with learning disabilities.
Yeah.
Danesfield Maternity Home was opened in November 1941 by the Jarrow Corporation. It had 9 maternity beds, increasing to 15 beds by 1957. The home accepted normal confinements admitted on the grounds of social and domestic need. The patients were attended by their own GPs. The home closed in 1974. Dean's Hospital was built by South Shields Corporation and was opened on 9th May 1883. It had accommodation for 34 beds for infectious disease cases. As the need for these types of beds was reduced, Dean's Hospital became a hospital for medical and long-term sick care. During the 1960s, Dean's Hospital cared for elderly patients. It closed in October 1998. Ellison Hall Infirmary, Hebburn Hall, was the former home of the Carr Ellison family. Part of the house was leased in 1887 and was converted to an accident hospital. It later became the infirmary. Hebburn Infirmary, up until 1948, was maintained by voluntary subscriptions. After 1948, the number of beds was increased from 24 to 27. These were used for ear, nose and throat surgery patients. It provided a minor casualty service up until its closure on 19th April 1975.
Had the infirmary in Hebburn, had Palmer's down Jarrow. You weren't 5 minutes away from a hospital then.
Well, do you remember the Hebburn one then?
Well, I had my hands stitched up. I had tetanus there quite often.
Oh, that was the days of the bend over tetanus, wasn't it?
All I know is that you could walk in any time and you got seen to. You didn't have to wait very long at all. That was, late 50s, early 60s. Great place. First place to go if anything went wrong. Carlson House. That used to be the infirmary. I think half of it was infirmary and half was living accommodation.
Harton Hospital. The original hospital buildings were built by the South Shields Poor Law Union and were opened as South Shields Workhouse in 1880. In 1930, the buildings were transferred to the South Shields Corporation. It was then called the Harton Institution and Hospital. In 1937, the hospital was separated from the main buildings and became a general hospital. In April 1993, the Ingham Wing was built and urgent care services were transferred from the Ingham Infirmary. The hospital was renamed the South Tyneside District Hospital. Since the 1990s, most of the original Victorian buildings have been demolished. The hospital is now part of the South Tyneside and Sunderland Hospital NHS Foundation.
I have a horrible memory of having my tonsils out, age 7, and I went into hospital with my mum. Parents couldn't stay in hospital those days, so I went into hospital with my mum, and she bought me a big toy. And we got to the, admissions, and I was told Under no circumstances could I take any toys in with me to hospital. And then I was put into a ward with just a lot of what looked to me to be ancient old people, in a kind of a line of beds. The next thing I knew, I woke up, terrible pain in my throat, a horrible sort of poisonous kind of medicine type feeling. It was a horrible experience. I'd started off badly, not being able to take in my special toy.
I had my tonsils out when I was 9, and my mother couldn't come in, so I just had to get on with it.
In your first year, you had to wear what was called a butterfly cap, and that was a square of linen, and you had to make it, and the round piece came on the top of your head, and then at the back you made it into 2 semicircular shapes that you had to use tiny pins to hold it together.
That's one of the things you remember about walking into the hospitals then. There was always like a smell of disinfectant and things, which you don't often seem to smell now when you go to hospitals. So I do think it was, probably old-fashioned now,
You don't get the disinfectant smell now.
Hebburn Hospital. The original hospital was a temporary hut of 4 beds for infectious diseases. This was replaced in 1899 by a permanent building with 39 beds. In 1950, it became a hospital for 22 female patients. In 1956, it became a hospital for chronic and long-term sick patients. The hospital closed in December 1996. A separate 16-bed smallpox hospital, added to the site in 1901, was demolished in 1933. Most of the original hospital buildings were eventually demolished, and Rose Lodge was built on the site. Monkton Hall Hospital was built in 1763. In 1903, the then owner, Francis Scott, turned the hall into a hospital, opening in 1907 as Monkton Hall Hospital for the feebly minded. It was a charitable organisation until 1949, when it became part of the new NHS. Latterly, the hospital has been used for healthcare provision for people with learning disabilities. Palmer's Memorial Hospital was founded by Charles Mark Palmer in memory of his wife Jane. It was opened in 1870. After 1948, the number of beds was increased from 15 to 25. These were used for ear, nose and throat surgery, dermatology and surgical convalescence. The hospital was demolished in 1983. Palmer Community Hospital was completed nearby in 1986.
The early days I remember Gerald Palmer's, before the new one was built. That was our local hospital. I just remember it being like the old Victorian style, wards and corridors. I think one time when I was a kid, we built bogies and had a nasty accident on a bogie. Ended up in Palmer's Hospital getting stitches in a place where you don't want to have stitches. And I just remember that it took 5 nurses apparently to keep us down while I done this. Just vague memories of them. It was a really old style hospital then. And obviously that disappeared. We've got a new one now. Yeah. Dentist wise, we used to have a school dentist at Balgownie House, Jarrow on B. Burn Road. Yeah, Balgownie. Remember Balgownie? Yeah.
Kids outside the schools.
Yeah, that was the school dentist, so all the schools all went there.
Primrose Hill Hospital was built as an infectious diseases hospital and was opened in 1888. In 1950, it became a hospital for patients suffering from tuberculosis, and from 1956 was a hospital for chronic and long-term sick patients.
I worked in some of the small hospitals that aren't there now. I was on the bank for a while after my first child, so you could work in lots of the hospitals there, so I did. I worked there was shifts at the Dean's Hospital, the Old Ingham Infirmary, and I'd also got a part-time job doing night duty at Primrose Hill Hospital, which was elderly care. They were quite compact, quite homely really.
The Floating Hospital. In 1876, a system of inspection vessels was established to protect the towns along the Tyne against importation of disease by shipping. In 1882, the Tyne Port Sanitary Authority was established, whose responsibility was the sanitary supervision of the river and of the shipping frequenting it. Initially an old ferry boat, the Durham was purchased and fitted up as a hospital ship. This proved inadequate, and a gallio was purchased and moored alongside it. In 1886, this was replaced by a purposely designed floating hospital built at Bill Quay by Messrs. Wood, Skinner and Co. for a cost of £5,700. The hospital had 3 buildings, each with 2 wards providing a total of 30 beds. Moored at Jarrow Slake, it floated on 10 pontoons and was only accessible by boat. Any seamen aboard ship found to have an infectious disease were quarantined and isolated on the floating hospital. By 1929, the floating hospital was viewed as redundant, having had only an average of 3 patients a year over the previous 10 years. It was scrapped the following year.